Hey there, cats and kittens. Thrash Pondo's back with a special friend of channel request today. And this is a long overdue friend of channel request. It goes out to Cindee D. And it's a compare and contrast of vintage police versus private eye TV shows. And this one, there was a lot of ground to cover. In fact, I'm going to give you my highlights. And perhaps later on we might want to do this as a live chat or a follow up or whatnot. I'll let you folks decide. But I'm going to give you what I got and we'll take it from there. And one of the things I noticed right at the gate, if you go back to the golden age of American television and their treatment of police procedural shows, the most iconic example one could think of is Dragnet. They all have the police as being these modern day centurions, these knights in blue, above reproach, straight as arrows. You don't see a lot of dirty cops, crooked cops. You don't see them bending the rules. They're just, again, they're like modern day heroes. We're opposed to the private eyes, who are more of these gritty, lowbrow, left of center, even when they're doing good types. And that actually stuck around until we saw Richard Diamond come on the scene. He was a little more hero-like. How could you not love the late, great David Jansen? Oh, one thing about him, by the way, he is one of only two actors who actually found themselves doing more than one private eye show. More about that later. Moving forward, even when you got into things like Adam 12, you saw the police generally were on the straight and narrow. Whenever the criminals offered to make deals to get themselves out of trouble, Malloy would be like, "We don't make deals. If you tell us the truth, it might help you in court, but we're not going to compromise our integrity." And there were some examples of crooked cops, but very, very, very rare. It's actually reminiscent of one of my favorite jokes in all of Gilligan's Island, given by Don Rickles, where he's reminiscing about his childhood, and he's talking about when I was a kid, and me and the other kids in the neighborhood played cops and robbers. I used to be the cop, never the good guy. And Ginger inquires, "The cops are the good guys." And he would say, "Not in my neighborhood." But you didn't see a lot of that in television at that time. And I think it's because as the television was very limited, call it naive at that time, I think a lot of the entertainments were. And it wasn't until later that we saw the possibility of maybe the good guys aren't always so good, at least in a more widescreen format. And the private eyes started to become a bit more glamorous. I mean, take, for example, Jim Rockford from the Rockford Files. He was an ex-con, yet was a much more flamboyant hero type. He lived a hand-to-mouth existence and still spent every week trying to help those in need. You go, Jim. And of course, how could one forget Cannon, played by the late, great William Conrad. Now, he brought a lot to the table. Korean War veteran, also a retired cop himself, who then went on to become a private eye. And he had this street smarts and the ice water in the veins, but he also brought a lot of education to his field. So he was almost a Renaissance man type of private eye. Oh, he also is the other actor who did more than one private eye show. He did a very short-lived show when I was a kid. I actually used to watch this on my old black and white set, that first set I got when I mentioned earlier. It was called Nero Wolfe, and it only lasted one season, but I thought he was amazing, and it was the part he was born for. And you know what? I don't know if I mentioned the other David Jansen, I'll Come In Again show. That, of course, was Harry-O. R.I.P. to both of them. Now, moving forward, the cops themselves started to become a bit grittier as they went. Of course, the most obvious would be Columbo. Now, he wasn't really a gritty cop. That was his persona. He would play the sort of bumbling fool who would disarm his opponents by acting incompetent. And then when they let their guard down, it was always, I don't know, there was just one more thing. And that would give the game away, and he would be able to bring them off to jail. Gotta point this out. He was actually based on, and I'm going to butcher the name, my Russian is terrible, sorry, Petriov from Crime and Punishment. So there's some big literary format there. And of course, how could one forget McCloud? McCloud was a cool one. He was this Texas lawman with this very homespun, down south, you know, type of street smarts. Very similar to Andy Griffith, only not nearly as comedic. But of course was transferred to the big city, specifically New York, and it was that fish out of water type story, but he always managed to bring his style of backwoods intelligence into whatever the problem was and managed to solve the crime. Oh, and by the way, one thing I love to point out, at the time, if there's one thing New York needed, it was a hero. Things were not going well in the Big Apple at that time. They never thought they could control the crime. And, well, apparently McCloud did his job, because the last time I was in New York, it was a lot safer than some of the other neighborhoods I've been in. But, moving forward, one of the other things we saw, by the way, is a growing influence of women in police procedural. Now, of course, the first one being, or the first one that I can recall as a child, being Policewoman. Now, it only lasted about 4 seasons, but again, it showed a woman being an undercover blah, 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 cop, tackling serious police issues and some of the more disturbing crimes of the time. They didn't sugarcoat it as much as they did during the Golden Age. And that's something you saw more and more. As we became more aware of crime as a people, we saw it more and more in our entertainments. And moving forward, when one talks about women in police procedural, how can you forget Charlie's Angels? Now, my favorite anecdote about Charlie's Angels is, and I got this from an old bio with Stan Lee when he worked with Aaron Spelling during the war. Apparently, Aaron Spelling had a crush on the Andrews sisters. All of them, it would seem. And he envisioned, it was probably more of a serial than because they didn't really do TV during World War II, but he envisioned an idea where 3 women in the USO were entertainers by day, but special agents by night, and they would actually go out and thwart Axis secret plans, and no one the wiser. Almost along the lines of the rumor during World War II that Shirley Temple could tap Morse code and would actually tap information to the Allies' headquarters back in Washington. Not true, but a really great premise. Now, of course, when Aaron Spelling, 30 years later, when he had the opportunity to do the show, the World War II angle was a little dated, although Wonder Woman was around, but he decided to make them undercover cops as opposed to members of the OSS. And you know what? I think it worked for him as well. And now, by this point, the private eyes are getting even more glamorous than before. I mean, the perfect example, of course, is Heart to Heart. I mean, these people were 80s jet setters, millionaires, not just self-made, but very capable millionaires who flew around the world having adventures and ended up becoming private eyes because they would always manage to stumble upon some type of intrigue, be it espionage, smuggling, that type of thing. And the two of them became sort of partners in anti-crime. And they even had I don't want to say henchman, but they had a loyal Thane who also helped them out, the character of Max, who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty while they kept their hands pristine clean. And you know what? I love that show. It was a lot of fun. And, of course, how could one forget Quincy with Jack Klugman? This was an interesting one because, again, as America became more and more interested in science, our shows became more and more interested in science. And he was a medical examiner. And the whole show was the science of crime solving. Before there was CSI, before there was NCIS, there was Quincy. Now, I can't do a show on police procedural without mentioning my favorite police procedural of all time, Hill Street Blues. And this one, I suppose by today's standards looked like they sugarcoated it, but it was truly the sort of underworld of American police, urban anti-crime units. But the hero, J. Trevante, who played Captain Furillo, gives a wonderful speech in an early episode where when the cops are trying to hot dog it, and he goes in the locker room and he's furious and he says, if you go out there and start bashing heads, you just become another street gang, and what separates them from us? And it's really truly a story, a warning really to the American constabulary to keep it on the up and up, because once you get on a slippery slope, well, let's just say we all know what could happen. But I always loved Hill Street Blues. It kind of went off the rails a little towards the end, but in its day, it was the greatest show, police procedural show at least, on TV. And so, what have we learned, Dorothy? Well, one of the coolest things about all the shows is they had a running thread from Mannix to after Mannix, is that while the police and the private eyes were adversaries and oftentimes worked against each other, deep down they were two sides of the same coin. They were always trying to get justice. I found it to be very similar to Sherlock Holmes and Lestrade. They had a rivalry, but weren't they all just trying to put the criminals away? And again, the overall theme being, in the end, it's never a good idea to sort of push the boundaries of our legal system. The more you try to do it, the worse things get, and it's always best when both sides try to stay within the law. Author's message, author's message. But anyway, that's all I have for you folks today. Cindee, thank you for your patience. If there's any more you folks would like to know, feel free to say something in the comments, and we can extrapolate and expand. Also, you know the routine. Like, subscribe, and forward to all your friends and or enemies. Oh, and by the way, I recently hit 100 subscribers. Thank you all very, very much. I treasure every single one of you. I'm going to be doing a special 100th episode. I won't tell you what it's on, but it's coming up really soon. And again, feel free to make any suggestions of future posts you folks would like to see. Anyway, all for now, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again very, 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 very soon. Peace.